This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
African Union envoy announces breakthrough in Sudan talks over all political aspects of transition as another coup attempt is thwarted. Libya's UN-backed government demands answers from France over missiles found in strongman Khalifa Haftar's base. And 38 more bodies recovered off the Tunisian coast after a migrant ship sank on the weekend. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, another senior executive resigns from struggling South African Airways. And in sport, the semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations set as Tunisia and Algeria go through. We start in Sudan, where the African Union has announced a major breakthrough on agreement of the specifics for political transition. The two sides and mediators are now expected to meet on Saturday to work on the constitutional declaration. Well, according to the AU Special Envoy Mohamed Hamed El Hassan Labat, the Forces for Declaration of Freedom and Change and the Military Council have reached an agreement on all aspects of the political transition process.
The two negotiating delegations from the Forces of Declaration for Freedom and Change and the Transitional Military Council met in a third round of negotiations. They are in complete agreement on the political announcement that determines all the bodies of the transitional stage.
The political document has been agreed upon unanimously. What is left is a proclamation which establishes the transitional period or the transition into a civilian government. This shall be debated on, discussed, and signed at the same time.
Well, the developments come as Sudan military rulers announced that they had thwarted a coup attempt involving a number of retired officers as well as officers still in service. The head of the Transitional Military Council's Security Committee says it was an attempt to undermine an agreement between the military and the opposition to share power for 3 years ahead of elections. He says at least 16 officers have been arrested in connection with the thwarted coup attempt.
Honorable citizens, we announce this failed coup attempt which has been planned for at this sensitive time ahead of the reached political deal between the TMC and the FFC. We saw the dangers and threats which have been threatening the safety and the security of this nation by a group of people who refuse the demands of the people and the biases of the military council, the rapid support forces, the police force and the security apparatus who see change in the country based on the draw and not by coups, which will only lead to destruction and lack of thriving. Honorable citizens, the TMC invites you, along with the RSF, the police force and the security apparatus, to work together for the sake of the nation.
Let's now head over to Libya, where the country's UN-backed government is demanding urgent answers after Paris conceded French missiles were found at a base used by Khalifa Haftar's forces. France's defense ministry confirmed that the US-made Javelin missiles had been purchased by France, but it denied supplying them to Haftar. France says its forces operating in the war-torn country had lost track of them after they were judged to be defective. In April, Haftar ordered his self-styled Libyan National Army on an offensive to take the Libyan capital from the UN-recognized government of national accord. The battle is the latest turmoil to rock the North African country. The African Union maintains that there is external interference in Libya, making it difficult for the warring factions of the North African countries to find a truce. The Union is warning all non-Libyan parties to stay away from the country's politics, insisting that the nation needs an internal solution only through dialogue. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy gives us more on that report.
The African Union says it is pushing for dialogue and reconciliation in Libya, but efforts are frustrated by non-Libyan parties. It doesn't mention who they are, but blames them for supply of arms to military factions and militias in the country in violation of the UN arms embargo. In their recently held summit in Niger, African heads of state threatened to start naming and shaming those intervening in the Libyan crisis. The African Union says that non-Libyan factions should help by complementing its efforts of dialogue and reconciliation for the warring factions of Libya. A Libya reconciliation conference has been planned for July in Addis Ababa, but the AU is yet to set a date. Coletta Wanjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, still in Libya, the head of the self-styled Libyan National Army has called for investigations after bomb-laden vehicles exploded near a group of Libyan National Army commanders in their eastern stronghold of Benghazi. LNA's General Command spokesperson says 2 members of the Special Forces were killed, along with 2 civilians. 33 other people were injured. Libya has been split between rival governments in the east and the west, and an array of militias fighting over power and oil fields since the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The LNA launched an offensive on Tripoli in April, which has been widely criticised by the UN and aid agencies.
We were attending the burial ceremony of the late Major General Khalifa Omar Isa al-Masmari in Al-Hawari Cemetery when the bombings occurred. The attendance was very large. The operations were arranged in good order. The first explosion was at the beginning of the cemetery to the west of the graveside. The last 2 explosions were on the withdrawal path in the cemetery to cause the greatest damage to the citizens.
To other news now. The Tunisian Red Crescent has said the death toll from a ship packed with migrants that sank off the Tunisian coast last weekend has risen to 58 after the recovery of 38 more bodies on Thursday. More than 80 African migrants in total are feared to have drowned in the incident in what would be one of the worst migrant boat disasters to date. The boat capsized after setting off for Europe from neighbouring Libya. Tunisian fishermen have now declared a health and humanitarian crisis, saying they cannot go on with their day-to-day work because they are not authorised to collect the corpses. They say that they'll protest to ensure the decent burial of the undocumented victims.
Tunisian fishermen in the coastal city of Zarzis say they can no longer work off the coast in the Mediterranean basin because the bodies of African migrants are everywhere. The corpses of 15 victims who drowned last week were recovered, but fishermen say hundreds of bodies are spread in the area.
The Tunisian-Libyan coast is full of dead bodies. I've seen between 400 and 500 corpses. Many died off Libya and have been transported by the waves to as far as 18 kilometers off Zarzis. The scene is horrific, and the pungent smell of decomposing bodies makes fishing impossible.
The Zarzis Fishermen Union has condemned the reaction of the authorities, especially in Italy. Many Tunisian captains say they could be jailed in Italy for saving migrants or recovering their corpses.
Tunisian fishermen do not have the logistical means and the authorization to collect the bodies of undocumented African migrants. It's forbidden by law. Europeans and the so-called Democrats and rights activists reject migrants alive or dead. It's unacceptable to treat humans as such.
The International Organization for Migration assisted 4 male survivors. One of the men, a 29-year-old national from Cote d'Ivoire, suffering from hypothermia, died in hospital in Xerxes.
Tunisia is Libya's neighbour. Libya has become a platform for irregular migration and high-risk boat departures due to instability. 1 migrant out of 3 drowns. There could be more undocumented accidents. The recent drowning of migrants is a tragedy that Tunisia cannot solve.
The 3 survivors of the recent tragedy in the Mediterranean are from sub-Saharan Africa. 2 are hospitalized and 1 is in a shelter run by the Tunisian Red Crescent.
According to the National Guard spokesman, 71 irregular migrants of different nationalities were rescued this week off Kirkina while attempting to cross to the Italian island of Lampedusa on board of a makeshift boat. They sailed from the Libyan city of Zuara. Authorities say this incident confirms that the flow of migrants will not stop. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
To Kenya now, where a 2-day conference on counter-terrorism and the prevention of violent extremism has just concluded in the capital, Nairobi. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has called on the international community to increase funding to the continent so as to eliminate the threat of terrorism. Member states are also being urged to fight radicalization by investing in their young people and including them in nation-building processes. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that report.
In 15 days alone this year, between the 16th and 31st of March, a total of 82 terror attacks were recorded across the African continent. In that period, there were 544 terrorism-related deaths, out of which 415 deaths resulted directly from terror attacks, while 129 deaths were recorded during counter-terror operations. 62% of those who died were civilians. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says there is a link between conflict in one particular country and the rise in terror-related attacks in Africa.
And there is one conflict in particular that has been a factor of terrorism in different parts of the continent, the Libya conflict. Arms from Libya have gone everywhere and have been a factor of terrorism in different other parts of the continent.
At a counter-terrorism conference in Nairobi, the African Union Commission says a lack of adequate support from the international community is hampering its response to terror threats.
I fail to understand the hesitation and reluctance of the international community to finance AUC support operations led by African countries. The old mechanisms have shown their limitations. That is why we are asking for the necessary mobilization of funds.
Aya Chebi, the African Union Special Envoy for the Youth, says the root causes of radicalization must be addressed if the continent is to succeed against terrorism. This requires the inclusion of the youth in the political and socio-economic spheres across the continent.
We have a generation trapped in the state of waiting because they are in constant negotiation to find their political and financial freedom. It's about the livelihoods of our young people who are barely surviving, who do not understand the contradictions of our times.
We need to make sure that nobody is left behind, that nobody feels discriminated or abandoned.
The conference is expected to adopt a number of resolutions in support of the African Union's agenda to combat terror and will call on the international community to increase its support. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including UN Secretary-General calls for immediate international community support to help Mozambique rebuild after 2 devastating cyclones. And Nigeria struggles to contain population growth with another 100 million people expected in the next 30 years.
Africa, the most iconic wildlife destination in the world. Its unique ecosystems were formed over countless eons. Many people can only dream of visiting this natural paradise. But now, for the first time ever, CGTN Wild Wonderland live show is bringing Africa to you through all of our online platforms. 14 episodes from July 22nd to 28th take you to adventure through the Great Plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the Serengeti in Tanzania, and the Greater Kruger Park in South Africa. Welcome aboard the wildest ride of a lifetime. This is Wild Wonderland live show, only on CGTN.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam recently said the controversial bill that sparked mass protests is dead. Reporter Xu Dan spoke with Grenville Cross, a criminal justice analyst and Hong Kong's Director of Public Prosecutions from 1997 to 2009, to hear his views on how this story played out.
What do you think of those protesters who stormed into the Legislative Council on July 1st? What was behind that?
Well, it was obviously a huge pity that happened, because most of the protests had been peaceful. But it's clear that there is a violent wing to the protesters, and they're prepared to use extreme violence in order to achieve their ends. As you know, they tried to batter their way into the Legislative Council on the 12th of June. They were unsuccessful in doing that, so they treated July the 1st as unfinished business. It's clear that they were highly organised, highly trained, highly resourced, and you could see clear chains of command and indeed of supply. So this was a highly organised attack on our Parliament, and obviously it's extremely reprehensible. No other civilised country would allow its Parliament to be invaded in that way, and obviously there must be consequences for those who are involved in doing it, because it is a direct attack not only on the rule of law but also on our very way of life.
What do you think of the Hong Kong police handling the situation?
The Hong Kong police have done an incredibly difficult job. They've been very restrained in the way they've responded to this. They've shown far more restraint than any other Western country, or indeed East country anywhere in the world would have shown in these type of circumstances. Particularly on June the 12th, the police laid their lives on the line for us all in what were clearly terrifying circumstances. They were attacked by people carrying sharpened spears, carrying bricks, carrying improvised weapons, and they stood their ground, and eventually they took steps to restore law and order. They did a marvellous job in my view, and we all owe them a great debt of gratitude.
Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. It's obviously a difficult time that we're going through, but I'm sure that the government will hold its nerve. It will allow things to settle down. It will then have to consider how perhaps it can do things better in future, how it can have more consultation. But it also must ensure that our core values are fully upheld. And by that I mean the rule of law, our independent prosecution service, and the notion that those who show contempt for our way of life should have to face the consequences.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for more international support to help Mozambique rebuild after two devastating cyclones. Guterres, who is in Mozambique for a two-day visit, met with Mozambican President Filipe Jacinto Nyusi and members of the government to discuss the response after cyclones Idai and Kenneth. The natural disasters affected around 2.2 million people in one of the worst weather-related catastrophes in Africa's history. The country estimates that the cost of reconstruction will be $3.2 billion, with donors having pledged $1.2 billion. The UN chief is set to visit affected areas and meet with survivors today.
Mozambique has undeniable moral authority here, because it's now clear that these natural disasters, which happen more often, more intensively and causing great devastations, have a lot to do with climate change. Despite that, Mozambique almost does not contribute to global warming, but it's at the forefront of the victims of this global warming. This gives it the right to demand from the international community strong solidarity and strong support, both in the response to the drama created by the storms that plagued the country and in preparing the country for the reconstruction and preparation for future situations.
Meanwhile, as the UN Secretary-General continues his tour of Mozambique, victims of the devastating cyclone Idai are struggling to get back to normal. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa has more.
When Cyclone Idai crashed into Mozambique's central region in March, it caused devastating floods in one of the worst weather-related disasters to hit the southern hemisphere. Mutizo's roof was the first thing blown away when the wind started that night. The wind was blowing at a speed of at least 195 kilometers per hour. Inside another house in the same neighborhood, 62-year-old Lorinda and her 2 adult sons hoped that their source of livelihood would survive.
I'm making these cookies to support us so that we can eat, because none of us have a job. I used to have a hair salon and that's where I used to make money. But now with it like this, it doesn't help. I want to pay for water, food, the children. I don't have a husband. He ran away when I got sick.
According to the United Nations, Cyclone Idai affected 1.85 million people, leaving a trail of destruction. 90% of all the infrastructure of Beira city destroyed.
The house broke, the tin roof on top, that part broke. When the rain falls, we don't sleep. We stay like this together.
6 weeks after Cyclone Idai struck, Cyclone Kenneth hit the northern provinces of Cabo Delgado and Nampula, affecting at least 400,000 people. Frederico Francisco is a principal in one of the schools hardest hit by the natural disaster.
Because of the cyclone, we have a problem with the classrooms, because most of the pavilions were vandalized by the cyclone. We don't have the tin roofs. That's the biggest difficulty we have. We are working in sub-conditions.
The World Food Programme says it plans to reach at least 600 victims at a cost of $110 million by March 2020.
The cyclone changed a lot in people's quality of life. Besides the destruction of infrastructure, the houses, the warehouses, the businesses, there was also a lot of destruction for the people who survive on fishing and agriculture.
Last month, the country hosted a donors conference hoping to raise $3.2 billion to help victims rebuild their lives, but raised only $1.2 billion. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
French President Emmanuel Macron and Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo have tapped into the conversation around a renewed relationship between France and Africa. They called for more cooperation during a dialogue with members of the African diaspora in Paris at the Élysée Palace. This is part of Macron's ongoing project to forge deeper ties with the continent. In 2017, he became the first French president to visit Ghana. Akufo-Addo said there is a need to improve Africa's economic outlook in order to uplift the status of Africans overseas. Macron, on the other hand, hopes to seek new ties in culture, economy and sport, and to engage young people who are less likely to be affected by the colonial past.
There is one thing that cannot be removed from France and Europe, and which differentiates us very deeply from United States and China. It's that if Africa fails, Europe cannot succeed. It's enough to look at the map of the world. It's not possible, because if Africa fails, everyone who does not make it in their countries in the African continent will come to the European continent. We will have tensions. We will enter into complete geopolitical chaos that at times some are already making us experience.
The place of the diaspora, the status of people in the diaspora, of the African diaspora, is intimately linked with what happens on the continent. And Africa strong and performing transforms your position and your status here in Europe. But an Africa which continues to live the narrative of poverty, hungry children, people going across the Sahara, going in rickety boats and dying in Lampedusa to get to Europe. That Africa is not a narrative that is going to help you over here. So I think between you and us, our main task is the transformation of the continent.
With an estimated population of about 200 million, Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, and that figure is projected to almost double by 2050 at the current growth rate of around 3.2% annually. A UN report projects Nigeria's population will surpass 300 million by 2050. The huge population is already stretching public resources to their limit as authorities battle to keep it under control. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
If there's one city that best captures Nigeria's population challenge, it is Lagos, the country's most populous city of over 21 million people and counting. The city is currently dealing with the size of a population its infrastructure and resources can barely cope with. The situation is a reflection of the wider population challenge confronting the entire country. At the heart of what is driving Nigeria's rapid population growth are early marriages, especially in the country's north, lack of adequate family planning, and high birth rate. The situation is further compounded by deeply rooted religious and cultural beliefs.
UNFPA and other relevant agencies of government are engaging religious organizations with a view to getting them to buy into this idea of, look, birth control is not a crime. It's not a sin. If we don't fight population overgrowth or population explosion, if we don't fight it, it will come back to haunt us. So if we make sure that, look, our population growth is pegged at a particular figure. For example, if every family is encouraged to say, okay, like 4 children per family, that's a way of bringing the population growth under control.
With no legislation on birth control, authorities are resorting to the use of moral suasion through campaigns on family planning as a means of keeping things in check. While the method is making some difference, there's still much to do, taking into account the current population growth rate of 3.2%.
If you go into the area of legislating on it, you'll be offending so many sensitivities. You offend the Christian sensitivity, you offend the Muslim sensitivity. But out of your own volition, knowing very, very well the danger, so many children, being born into a family that can ill afford them, the danger they pose to the family and to the society. If you realize all this, of course you restrain yourself. You restrain yourself. You don't just produce children for the sake of producing children. No, that era has gone.
With an economy growing at 2%, far less than the population growth rate of 3.2%, Nigeria faces a tough struggle to take care of its ballooning population. Unemployment rate is projected to rise from its current 23.1% to 33.5% by 2020. There's a huge infrastructure deficit, and the ones available are overstretched. Nigeria plans to spend $29 billion this year and incrementally in subsequent years in order to address some of these challenges. But if it does not look for a completely different way to address this population explosion, all of that spending may not amount to much. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
A recap of your top stories now. In Sudan, the African Union has announced a major breakthrough on agreement of the specifics for political transition. The two sides and mediators are now expected to meet on Saturday to work on the constitutional declaration. Well, according to the AU Special Envoy Mohammed Hamid El Hassan Labat, the Forces for Declaration of Freedom and Change and the Military Council have reached an agreement on all aspects of the political transition process. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for more international support to help Mozambique rebuild after two devastating cyclones. Guterres, who is in Mozambique for a two-day visit, met with Mozambican President Felipe Jacinto Nyusi and members of the government to discuss the response after cyclones Idai and Kenneth. The UN chief is set to visit affected areas and meet with survivors today. And Libya's UN-backed government is demanding urgent answers after Paris conceded French missiles were found at a base used by Khalifa Haftar's forces. France's defense ministry confirmed that the US-made Javelin missiles had been purchased by France, but it denied supplying them to Haftar. France says its forces operating in the war-torn country had lost track of them after they were judged to be defective. And those are the top stories that we're covering for you. Well, we have all the business news coming up for you after the break, including another senior executive resigns from struggling South African Airways. And Kenya freezes licenses of 27 betting firms, including SportPesa.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The chairman of South African Airways, Johannes Bekomuzi Magwaza, has resigned from the national carrier, citing personal reasons. He becomes the second highest profile official to leave, following the exit of former CEO Vuyani Jarana. Jarana resigned in June due to what he called lack of government support and bureaucracy that undermined his turnaround strategy. SAA is dependent on government bailouts as it grapples with soaring operational costs and revenue losses. Shortly after Magwaza's resignation, the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni announced additional funding from the country's contingency reserve to shore up state-owned parastatals. Well, staying in the country, there's been a sharp increase in South Africans moving their investments offshore. The weak economy and uncertain political climate is pushing a number of South Africans to look for safer havens overseas, not only for their money, but for their families too. Sumitra Naidu takes a look at some of the issues behind this trend.
It's been a rough few years in South Africa. The economy is weak and unemployment is at an all-time high.
So over the last 3 years, we've failed to break 2% economic growth in the country. And that's really, sad, given the fact that there was so much hope in terms of SA. This is one of the most active, emerging markets in Africa.
John T. Leon is a partner at Financial Immigration, a tax company that assists South Africans that want to seize their tax residency and move offshore. Financial Immigration says it's experiencing a massive uptick in inquiries, people either wanting to move their investments abroad or seize their tax residency in South Africa, and even wanting to physically emigrate altogether.
Because they're worried and want to safeguard their assets or their investments. So the company's been around for about 11 years now. And if we just look back at the past years, from last year to this year, there's a 200% increase in inquiries.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is trying his utmost to pull investors in, but concerns around governance breaches at state institutions and issues around state capture persist and seem to have sapped investor confidence.
The very bad exchange rate and the weak currency of South Africa and the possibility that investments in South Africa will only decrease and not get better. And I think the biggest one, the one that always comes up in consultations with clients, is the political instability of this country. And the major one, especially for instance, the past year, has been the talks around land expropriation without compensation.
There has been few issues really, apart from the land issue in terms of the nationalization of the central bank, the Reserve Bank of South Africa. And there are different views, possibly that also unsettles investors. But I think broadly, people want hard currencies. Remember, the dollar or euro is almost like a security on its own. It's like you buying an asset because you want to hedge yourself against the rand depreciating.
It's been touch and go in South Africa for a while now. Drastic changes to policy may be the only solution to arresting the economic decline and the outflow of people and their money. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Kenya has not renewed the licenses of 27 betting companies, including Everton sponsors SportPesa. The government has also ordered telecom firms to suspend accounts used by customers to place wagers. The country's Interior Ministry says the betting firms have outstanding renewal requirements and are being reviewed to determine if they are fit and proper. Placing bets through mobile phones is very popular in East Africa, where the industry is fast-growing and lucrative. Its popularity has been driven by satellite and digital television and smartphones. SportPesa ranks as Kenya's 11th most popular website. That's according to the website ranking site Alexa. In May, Kenya's betting watchdog announced sweeping restrictions on gambling advertisements, including outright bans on celebrity endorsements and social media promotions. In a further escalation of tensions with Iran, the United Kingdom says one of its oil tankers was threatened by Iranian boats as it was sailing out of the Persian Gulf. London says a UK warship intervened when Iranian boats tried to divert the British heritage tanker into Iranian waters as it was crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has denied the allegations, but the incident follows the seizure of an Iranian tanker by British forces in Gibraltar. CG10's Nathan King reports.
The UK says a naval frigate, the HMS Montrose, pointed its deck guns at 3 small Iranian vessels who were trying to intercept the tanker.
Obviously very concerning developments, but also I'm very proud of the Royal Navy and the role that they played in keeping British assets, British shipping safe. We are continuing to monitor the situation very, very carefully.
Tensions have been running high between the UK and Iran since British forces seized an Iranian tanker in Gibraltar, allegedly bound for Syria, breaching European Union sanctions. Iran has denied accusations that its Islamic Revolutionary Guard tried to seize the UK ship, but the West has blamed Tehran for recent incidents targeting other oil tankers. Iran also downed an unmanned US drone recently after it allegedly flew into Iranian airspace. Iran says it will protect its interests.
After the seizure of our oil tanker by the English, everyone is waiting to see a reaction from Iran any second. Mostly because at least 3 of our high-ranking officials in military and security, like the Minister of Defense, the head of the General Armed Forces, and Mr. Rouhani, who other than being president is the head of the High National Security Council of Iran, have frankly spoken on this topic and have warned that they will respond for sure. Even yesterday, Mr. Rouhani said that England will understand the consequences of its measures.
The tensions have been bubbling for a year, stemming from the unilateral withdrawal by Washington from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and the reimposition of sanctions and an oil embargo. Tehran has responded by increasing uranium enrichment and demanding that European and other nations stick by the nuclear deal and its promised economic benefits. This latest incident might help the US in a bid to create an international coalition to protect shipping in the Persian Gulf, but of course that could increase military tensions. On the diplomatic front, there has been some movement. French diplomats have been in Tehran. Meanwhile, the leadership of Qatar have been here in Washington. And both are suggesting a kind of freeze on the tit-for-tat escalation that we've seen between Washington and Tehran to create a better climate and hope some movement towards talks. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Chinese telecom giant Huawei has again blasted Washington for restricting its business in the US. A company executive made the remarks as Huawei released its annual sustainability report. The company also laid out how it plans to continue growth in an uncertain global environment. Our reporter He Weiwei has more from the press briefing in Shenzhen.
This morning, Huawei held its first press conference after the United States announced that it will allow American companies to resell components to Huawei. And at the presser this morning, Huawei's chairman Liang Hua said very clearly that actually so far there is no change. And also Huawei calls for lifting the entity list from the United States.
We are strongly opposed to the U.S. decision to put Huawei on the entity list. We believe it is not a fact-based decision, and it's harmful, especially to U.S. companies. Huawei's business is now moving forward as usual. We will release a financial performance report at the end of this month.
Well, recently we all noticed the flip-flop by the United States on its Huawei policy, and actually the American, including other countries, political uncertainty remains high risk for Huawei in its global market and with other countries. So when asked how to cope with the challenges, the Liang Hua says that Huawei will continue to dedicate itself to providing better services for its consumers. That's about 3 billion people worldwide. And also it will follow the rules and laws of different countries. And also Huawei is willing to sign no spy agreement with any countries or any companies.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Ethiopian musicians in Israel use the stage to tell the public about challenges that they face against the security apparatus.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now to the most recent demonstrations in Israel, which erupted after an 18-year-old boy of Ethiopian descent was fatally shot by a police officer in June. Israeli authorities say over 110 officers were wounded in the protests and at least 150 protesters were arrested. Young Ethiopian musicians living in Israel are now using the stage and their songs to tell the public about alleged unchecked and widespread police brutality. Let's now take a look.
Large numbers of Ethiopian Jews began arriving in Israel through secret airlifts in the 1980s. The new arrivals from a rural developing African country struggle to find their footing in an increasingly high-tech Israel. Throughout the decades, Ethiopians have suffered discrimination in Israel. Today, a group of them who have made it in the music industry are using their talent to try and end the alleged racism in Israel.
The racism that we suffer here is expressed in the music. It empowers the young generation not to fear, but to do what they love.
Violence is never the solution in my opinion. But if you are looking at recent events, it is important to note that violence is the result, but it is not the way. It is not supposed to be the way. It is a call for help, a cry of an entire community. And if something helped me to see everyone at eye level, it's music.
Their music illustrates the growing Ethiopian-Israeli presence in the local music scene. It also reflects the ongoing struggles against alleged racism and discrimination, some 3 decades after Ethiopian Jews began arriving in Israel.
There are instances in the past of casualties in the community, but every time we try and solve this situation, the case is closed. And that is why we decided to take it to the streets, because we are not getting the justice that we need.
Today, there is around 150,000 people in the Israel-Ethiopian community, some 2% of the country's 9 million citizens. While some Israelis of Ethiopian descent have made gains in areas like the military, the police force and politics, the community continues to struggle with a lack of opportunity and high poverty rate. Against this backdrop, Israeli artists of Ethiopian heritage are breaking out in the entertainment world, especially in the growing hip-hop and dancehall scenes. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
Now to the US. In Ohio, chaos interrupted at a court hearing as two brothers lunged at a handcuffed man convicted of murdering their mother. The accused was charged for shooting and killing Elizabeth Pledger Stewart. One of the brothers leaped and initiated the attack as the sister was preparing to read a statement to the court. Later, courtroom officers managed to break off the fight and the two brothers were arrested. Local media reports that the sentencing hearing was postponed and the convicted murderer was taken to a nearby hospital. We have all the sports news coming up for you, including the semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations set as Tunisia and Algeria go through.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
We start with the Africa Cup of Nations, where Tunisia has ended Madagascar's historic run with a 3-0 win in the quarterfinals. Tunisia led through Padiani Sassi's deflected shot from the edge of the box in the 52nd minute. After just 8 minutes, Youssef Msakini doubled the lead for the Eagles of Carthage. The AFCON newcomers' hopes were further dented with a Naim Sliti goal in injury time, giving Tunisia their first regulation time win in the tournament after drawing all their group matches and getting past Ghana through penalties after a 1-1 draw in the round of 16. Tunisia will now face Senegal on Sunday for a chance to reach the final.
Thank God for everything. We had a good game today and won with a wide score. We were more focused than Madagascar's team. Our spirits were high. Thank God for the win.
I feel really sorry for all the people in Madagascar. I know that we lost in quarter-final because after what you guys see before what we did, I think we can go more than quarter-final, but it is football.
2015 Africa Cup of Nations champions Côte d'Ivoire have been eliminated from this year's tournament by Algeria. The West Africans were undone in the penalty kicks after the match ended in a 1-1 draw in the regulation and extra time. CGTN's Sadiq Shaban reports.
This was the 8th time the two sides were meeting, and prior to the match, Côte d'Ivoire boasted of a better record of 3 victories. But Algeria had clear intentions of changing that history when they took the lead in the first half through Soufiane Fighouli. They should have doubled the advantage shortly afterwards, but they missed a penalty kick. The Elephants regrouped and trampled their way into the match, scoring a goal through Jonathan Kojia, sending the tie into extra time. There was no change of scoreline after that, forcing the tie into penalty kicks, where the Elephant missed 2 penalty kicks, giving Algeria their first semi-final in 29 years. Both sides spoke after the match.
We weren't killers, but in the end, I'll obviously remember the victory, and I prefer the modest one. Qualifying against Côte d'Ivoire and going to the semi-finals is a huge satisfaction.
C'est une énorme satisfaction.
Comme je dis, avait un bel adversaire devant nous.
There was a good opponent in front of us. We ended up on penalties. We're going to use this as a basis for building a team. If I take the example of Senegal in 2017, they had stopped in the quarter-finals. Today they're in the semi-finals, so 2 years to build.
And here now is a complete list and pairing of the semi-finals after the conclusion of 2 days of quarter-final matches. The remaining 4 teams will now take a 2-day deserved break before resuming action in the semi-final on Sunday. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN, in Suez Stadium, Egypt.
Well, let's get more on the ongoing tournament in Egypt, and Sadiq Shaban is there for us. Sadiq, Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire were the pre-match favourites in their match against Algeria. What broke the elephants' back? Sadiq, I'm just going to repeat that question. Ivory Coast were the pre-match favourites in their match against Algeria. What broke the elephants' back? I'm terribly sorry, we have lost Sadiq there, but we'll try and get him a bit later in the programme. Let's move on now to Eden Hazard. He trained with his new Real Madrid teammates in thundery weather in Montreal on Thursday as La Liga giants prepared for their pre-season tour. One player who has been the subject of another summer of transfer speculation away from the club is Gareth Bale. He was also present for the session. Zinedine Zidane will lead his 29-man squad through training sessions in Montreal before the side travels to the United States. Well, Real are scheduled to take part in the International Champions Cup, where they will face Bayern Munich, Arsenal and Atletico Madrid. Serena Williams sailed through to her 11th Wimbledon final with a dominant display over unseeded Czech Barbara Strykova in a brutal 6-1, 6-2 victory on centre court on Thursday. Using a combination of huge serves and forehands, the veteran remained in control throughout the encounter to set up a showdown with Romanian former world number 1 Simona Halep in Saturday's final. The 37-year-old Williams will become the oldest woman to contest a Grand Slam final in the professional era, and a win would put her alongside Margaret Court's record 24 singles majors.
I just need some matches, and every match I know that I'm improving, and I just needed to feel good, and I said now that I feel good I can do what I do best, which is play tennis.
In cycling, Belgian Dylan Teuns is the winner of the 6th stage of the Tour de France. Teuns won his maiden Tour stage after 4 hours and 29.3 seconds, just 11 seconds ahead of Italian Giulio Ciccone, who took the yellow jersey from Julian Alaphilippe by 6 seconds. Belgian Xandro Maurice took 3rd place defending champion Geraint Thomas, who was the strongest of the overall contenders, as he took 4th place, 2 seconds ahead of 5th placed Thibaut Pinot of France. 27-year-old Teuns is now 3rd in general classifications, heading into round 7, the longest of this year's tour.
La médaille commémorant sa victoire aujourd'hui dans cette superbe vainqueur d'étape.
Well, let's get you more on the ongoing tournament in Egypt. We can now return to Sadiq Shaban, who is there for us live from Suez. Côte d'Ivoire were the pre-match favourites in their match against Algeria. What broke the elephants' back?
Well, I apologize, I couldn't hear you earlier on, I think certainly because it's a massive heat here. We are clocking 42 degrees centigrade. But that aside, the elephants of Ivory Coast were felled by mischances and the sheer weight that was put into them by the Algerians in this match. Algeria was a better side in this quarter-final. They have not conceded any match so far. Clean sheet, 4 games and 10 goals. And this was the first time that they actually conceded 1 goal. But also Ivory Coast, or Cote d'Ivoire rather, will have to blame themselves because of indiscipline that was witnessed in the team. A couple of their players picking up cautions and missing 2 crucial penalty kicks in the match. And these, as they leave Egypt today for Abidjan, they will be reflecting on the mistakes that cost them a chance in the semi-final late last evening.
And Sadiq, they may have been eliminated from the tournament, but what do Madagascar take away with them from this competition?
They take everything that has been given to them from this competition, a sense of national pride, a sense of history makers, and just sheer and unprecedented performance in their first ever qualification. This was a team that was forced to begin qualifying this campaign from the pre-qualifiers way back in March 2017. They've come all the way, including notching Victoria's achievement against Nigeria. And as they leave today for Antananarivo, the team spoke to reporters late last evening, say they will be back in the next qualifiers. And in fact, they say, had it not been for the fact that Algeria was a better side with a better technical profile, perhaps they were still dreaming up to very late in that match of causing yet another upset.
And finally, Sadiq, the tournament now takes a 2-day break. Are fans likely to return to the stadium for the remaining 4 matches?
That is a question that we will have to wait and see, Karen, in the next few days. The local organizing committee is now rallying up supporters to come back into the stadium. We saw big numbers when Egypt was playing in the group stages, but ever since they were knocked out by South Africa, fans have disappeared from the tournament. We saw a couple of Algerian fans here yesterday, Cote d'Ivoire fans, but we know there has not been quite a lot of fans coming into the stadium. But we still get a couple of Egyptian fans who are very enthusiastic about coming back. Senegal fans are here, but the local organizing committee is rallying up supporters and telling them it's time to get back to the stadium and finish this competition on a high.
OK, thank you for that update. That was CGTN Sadiq Sudan there in Suez reporting on the Africa Cup of Nations taking place in Egypt. A gym in California is harnessing human workout energy and turning it into electricity so as to power the facility. The fitness centre has installed a non-motorised treadmill and several upright cycles made by Washington-based equipment manufacturer Sports Art. Here's CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy with more.
The Sacramento Eco Fitness has installed several upright cycles made by Washington-based equipment manufacturer Sports Art. The cardio machines have inbuilt inverters similar to those found on solar panels and wind turbines, which turn the watts generated during a workout into electricity. Electricity produced is then used to power the gym. Any excess electricity produced is sent to a battery to keep the lights on during off-peak hours.
I have somebody right now exercising, but while they're exercising and burning calories, they're actually able to produce watts, which we use that energy to power the facility itself.
Antonio says a spin class on stationary cycles produces between 1,000 and 2,500 watts. His gym also owns a treadmill, which is self-powered and uses electromagnetic and mechanical braking system to generate power. The machine uses no power. It only moves when someone steps on it and pushes the belt around. Many of the members at this fitness facility say they joined the gym purely because they liked the eco cardio machines.
Well, working in the environmental testing industry, it's really important to me that everything is environmentally conscious. So combining fitness and something that's, of course, really good for you and the environment is just probably one of the best ideas that anybody could ever come up with.
For Avina, his self-powered gym is only the beginning. He hopes that someday gyms will be able to power an entire city on their own by producing enough energy through workout sessions. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN.
What a great idea. I hope they get cheaper memberships. That's it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow